Hey there, pre-med. This video is actually an excerpt from my Testing and Study Skills seminar series that I teach at schools and institutions. So the format is a little different than what we usually see here on YouTube. However, I thought that this lesson was so valuable, I wanted to share it here with you all. I hope you enjoy. We're going to dive right into our 2 laws of study skills with a fun and realistic situation. We have 2 students who start the semester by setting a goal. They're going to get an A in their biochemistry class. They're taking the same class, they're handshaking, they're saying, we're gonna rock this semester. The semester goes by, and at the end of the semester, the students get their grades back. One of the students got an A, the other got a B-. So I would like you to pause this video and for a few minutes just think about what could have been the difference between these 2 students. Given only the information on the screen, why did one student get an A and the other get a B-? There are multiple answers to this question, so go ahead, think through it, and then we'll come back together and discuss. All right, so in reflecting about the differences between these 2 students, you could have come up with a few controllable differences. Those would be things like the student who got an A had better study skills. They attended office hours and paid a lot of attention in the in-class experience and made sure to study diligently for their exams. Maybe the B- student didn't do that as much. We could also think about uncontrollable situations, like the B- student could have gotten really sick or had adverse events in their life that prevented them from doing well in school. They could have also been taking other really challenging courses alongside biochemistry that prevented them from really focusing on this challenging class. And there's some things that could have been in between, right? Where maybe the B- student just did not jive with the subject or didn't really like how the professor was presenting the information. There's components of that are both controllable and uncontrollable, right? So maybe this was not the best way to ask this question. Instead, I'm going to ask you, what is the same between these 2 students? And really, there's only 2 things. They're both taking the same biochemistry class, and they both had the same goal to get an A. So guess what didn't matter when it came to their outcomes? That goal. The goal did not matter, and that is our first law of study skills. It's not to say that goals aren't important. It's nice to know where we're going and to have a vision of how we're going to get there. But fixating only on the goal, only on getting the A, is kind of like looking at Google Maps and being like, cool, I want to go there, and never actually getting into the car. So we're going to focus, rather than on setting goals, on the processes by which we get to our outcomes. Things like good quality study skills, resilience training, managing our mindset and our external environment to make sure that we can be successful on that journey towards our desired outcomes. So that's our first law: set it and forget it when it comes to goals. We all want to do well in our academic career. We all want those A's, we all want those high scores on standardized tests. We don't need to fixate on them throughout the process. That takes us to our second law of study skills, which we're going to start by discussing a cool idea called the Pareto Principle, or the 80-20 rule. You may have heard this in an econ class or social sciences class, and this principle was first written about by this guy, Pareto, that's why it's named after him, who realized that 80% of the land in Italy was only owned by 20% of the population. And as he dug into more economics ideas, he realized that this ratio, 80% to 20%, comes up over and over again. Now, this principle comes up a lot in our personal life. Most of us wear only 20% of the clothes in our closet 80% of the time. And it especially comes up in studying. If you study 10 hours, I can bet you that only a fraction, maybe 2 hours of that study time was where you got the majority of your quality work done. It's not to say that those other 8 hours weren't useful, it's just that we weren't as efficient and weren't as effective as we were during this minority time where we got a lot of work done. Now, the actual ratio doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's 80-20, 70-30. What's really important here is that more hours doesn't necessarily mean better work. A lot of students come to me and they say, hey, I want to study for this test, or I want to get better at this, so I know I need to just put more hours in. I need to study 12 hours a day. And I gotta tell you, more hours doesn't necessarily get us our results. So that is our second law of study skills. More is not better. If we're adding more hours without better quality, then we're just getting ourselves burnt out and tired. Instead, it's more important to say, okay, where's the quality work happening and how can I maximize when that quality work gets done? And put my most important tasks when I am my best study self, when I'm going to get the most work done and feel really good about the results. So how do we do this? We focus on where we are the most efficient, basically how we manage our energy rather than our time. And the best way to do that is to reflect on your past study experiences. So this brings us to our first assignment in the module. I'm going to ask you to reflect over the past 2 weeks or so. When did you have your best study experience? This is where you were like rocking it. You were learning so much, you were getting so much done. You're like, I am the most efficient, best academic person in the world. I want you to think about, where were you when that study experience happened? Were you in the library? Were you in your bedroom? Were you in a cafe? When was it? Both the time of day and the day of the week. Was it Monday morning or Friday afternoon? What were you working on? Were you writing a paper, studying for an exam, taking notes? What was the action that you were taking? And how did you take that action? Were you working in a group? Were you working by yourself? Were you watching videos or reading a book, right? So what modality were you using and what kind of group were you in? So writing all that down for your best study experience first. Then we're going to contrast it with your worst study experience. So same thing, thinking back in the past 2 weeks, where was that study experience where you sat down to study? You're like, I'm going to get work done. 3 hours went by and we were on TikTok, we got distracted, maybe we talked to a friend, maybe we just sat in front of our screen watching that blinking cursor and just mind went blank, right? So when did that worst study experience happen? Where were you? When was it? What were you working on and how were you working on it? And what components made that the worst study experience? So I'd like you to go ahead, do that assignment, reflect on your best versus worst study experience, and I'll see you in the next video. Okay, so that was a lesson from my Testing and Study Skills seminar series for pre-health and pre-med students. If you liked this video and want more of these topics on YouTube, please go ahead and let me know in the comments below. And as always, happy studying.